Welcome back to another edition of the podcast for a full match reaction of tonight's fixture between Carlisle United and Scunthorpe. Of course, it sees the Cumbrians just about defeat Scunthorpe United in a promotion cracker, I suppose you could put it like that, at Blundell Park. Of course, the game finished 3-2, and it's a big win for Carlisle. If we look at the record against sides who have been performing well, or currently in the top 7, I should say, the previous 3 games, which of course was against York, Rochdale and Boreham Wood, they've lost all 3. So they really did need to get back to winning ways, because it has been a little bit shaky, I suppose, in recent weeks at Carlisle, despite them, climbing back into the top 3 now. But, we look at some of their recent results. There's been some disappointing performances, you could say, as I've mentioned, particularly against the top 7. I think in terms of the actual how the game went, over the balance of play, was it a fair result? Probably not. I'd have probably said it was a draw, maybe even swinging towards Scunthorpe. But the difference was Carlisle United were ruthless on the night. They took their chances, where on the opposite side of things, Scunthorpe United didn't. And ultimately, it's a massive 3 points for Carlisle, and that's why they've got all 3 points. Please come in with your comments, guys, and let us know your thoughts on tonight's fixture. Someone's put Mark Hughes clapping emoji. Yeah, he's someone who in recent weeks has been under a little bit of pressure, I suppose, at Carlisle, particularly after that defeat against York City, where they were humiliated a couple of weeks ago. I think the pressure's off him now when you look at the Altrincham game, and particularly after tonight. Someone's come and said Brunton Park, not Blundell Park. I'm getting mixed up with Grimsby's ground. I do apologise for that. And I've also had an entertaining game, only one real bit of quality, which was Carlisle's third goal. Yeah, of course, Adji Boy, which we'll come on to and talk about the redemption of him as well at Carlisle. But I totally agree with that. I think if you look at the other 4 goals, which we are going to speak about tonight, I can only pick out one where I thought, yeah, that was a real quality goal. But it maybe potentially Scunthorpe's first goal, although it was a mistake that they capitalised on it. It was quite a good finish. But yeah, I think overall of the balance, I think you'd probably say that's the only one that stands out, where it was a real bit of pure quality that saw Carlisle get a third in the game. But we're going to talk about the events. I want to hear your comments after tonight's game too, so please keep them coming in. Let's start things off with the first half and how it kind of went. Of course, it was 1-1 at half time. We actually look overall, it was, of course, Carlisle who took the lead. I think before that, it was very even. I think, to be fair, Carlisle probably were knocking on the door to get that first. And, of course, they did in the game through Embleton. It was quite a tame shot from him, I felt. Of course, he's another player, a little bit like Adji Boy, where they're quite big names, I suppose, when they first came into Carlisle, and maybe they've not lived up to the hype as of yet. But tonight, him getting, I think, his second goal for the season must be a good moment for him. But I have to say, the Scunthorpe United keeper, and I know it's been an area in which Scunthorpe have kind of struggled with throughout the season. One of the few issues, I suppose, for them is, is the goalkeeping position. It feels like under Mahadi, since he's come in from Leeds, they've been a lot more comfortable since he's come in. Yet he has clearly got a mistake in him, which we saw tonight. And, you'd like to think that most goalkeepers in this division would save that, because it was a really tame shot that saw Carlisle United take the lead. But it wasn't long before Scunthorpe, of course, got an equaliser in the game through a mistake from a relatively new signing in Ryan Galvin. Of course, was done over the top of a ball, and it fell to Cal Roberts. And I think when Cal Roberts is through on goal, you expect him to score, and it was a great finish to put them on level terms. And from that until the end of the half, I'd probably say that Scunthorpe were probably knocking on the door a little bit more, looking more likely to score, but it was a very balanced game going into half-time, I felt, overall. And in the second half, it certainly opened up a lot more. And, Carlisle later took the lead through David Adjiboy, another person we've spoke about, who a lot of people felt his career at Carlisle may have well have been over. And we've seen in recent weeks this little bit of redemption, from him. He scored against Altrincham. He's now scored twice tonight. And of course, he scored a goal tonight. Another one where it wasn't necessarily a mistake from Scunthorpe, but he was left open in the box. And you can't be giving players at this who are playing for a side in the top three, that sort of space, and very uncharacteristic, I suppose, from Scunthorpe, in my opinion. If you look at them throughout the season, they've been relatively strong defensively, very well organised, and tonight it didn't feel like they particularly were at times. And of course, David Adjiboy got a second for Carlisle, and I think Scunthorpe would have been very disappointed because up until that point, from half-time till they scored, Carlisle, Scunthorpe were looking like the side that were going to go on to score. Adjiboy then later got another goal in the game, which is, as we've mentioned, probably the goal of the game, the only real quality goal, you could say, in the game. Kind of caught Scunthorpe out when they were pushing forward, and instead of him running down the wing like a typical winger does, he cut in, took his time and slotted it into the bottom left corner, and it was a great finish from him to get his second in the game. And I think at that point it felt like it probably was game over. I think about 70 minutes had gone, 75, and it felt like after that it was game over in the game once Adjiboy had got his second and Carlisle were 3-1 up. But later on, Scunthorpe got another one in the game in just before 90 minutes, probably 93rd minute, I believe it was. 7 minutes, of course, added on in the game, and they came back into it, and it felt like there was slight thought that they may have got another goal in the dying seconds, but for them, unfortunately, it wasn't the case, and Carlisle pick up all 3 points. There's questions, of course, about Scunthorpe should have got a penalty. I was watching it on National League TV, and there were Carlisle commentary who actually felt that it was a penalty to Scunthorpe. I've seen them given, I'm not saying that, but I still, even as a neutral at the time when it was 2-1, I believe, Hayden went into the back of him, but I don't really think it was a penalty, if that makes sense. It's hard to explain without kind of you guys showing it. It kind of like came across and then he kind of nudged him. Just depends how forceful he was, but I thought the Scunthorpe man went down a little bit easy, and I think Hayden kind of beat him to the ball. Of course, I haven't watched that back yet, so my opinion may change when I've watched it back. But even Carlisle supporters were saying it probably should have been a penalty. That that could have changed the game if that was given. And Scunthorpe had loads of opportunities. The only thing I will say, it was all Carlisle's own doing. It was mistakes after mistakes from Carlisle. And the concern for me, and it's hard to say this because they've just done the double over Scunthorpe, who are a fellow promotion contender, but the concerns for me from Carlisle's perspective is the amount of mistakes that they're giving teams at the moment or throughout the whole season. It doesn't feel like the defence is settled, and they're out of the title race now. It's too much of an ask for them to go on to win the title. But they need to be informed going into the playoffs. And in the playoffs, I don't feel if you haven't got a comfortable defence that's strong defensively, I don't think that's a sign of a side that can go up via the playoffs. In my opinion, if we look at previous years, the sides that have gone up through the playoffs, maybe not the best sides or the best going forward, but they're just being strong defensively and really hard to break down. And Carlisle just concede way too many mistakes. I think within that whole back four, there's only one defender in there that I'd be really comfortable with as if I was a Carlisle fan, to be consistent week in, week out. You've got Aaron Hayden, who was brilliant for Wrexham, and overall, I think he's a strong defender, but he's got so many mistakes in him. Every time I watch the highlights, there's always mistakes from him that, often lead to goals, and it's having a detrimental effect, I feel, on Carlisle at the moment. I think as well, to go to Williams at fullback, very hit and miss as well. He's another one made mistakes tonight. And fortunately, it didn't lead to a goal for Scunthorpe, but on another night could have done. And even Galvin, I know from his time at Halifax, recently come in, very good going forward, got some very good attributes, but he's also got a mistake in him, as we saw tonight. So if you look at that whole back four, the only real defender that I've got a lot of confidence in for Carlisle would be Morgan Feeney at the back there, and that is my concern. On the positive side for them, midfield, I feel like as the season's got on, they look a lot stronger now. Gillied, McAdam, I feel those two in the midfield are two of the best midfielders in this division. I think on the night, they were excellent to kind of contain Ewing, Rowley in that midfield. I think Carlisle did kind of win that battle in the midfield throughout the 90 minutes. That's something I will certainly give to them. And, going towards the forward front, another sign of a positive is earlier on in the season, they were relying heavily on Regan Linney and they were very one-dimensional. And I suppose as we saw from probably like October, November to maybe Christmas time, teams kind of found out Carlisle. Everyone was just putting two men on Regan Linney. And that had an effect on them, where it feels like now, although he's not scoring like he was doing, his record's really gone downhill for him as an individual. The positive for Carlisle overall, more than him as the individual, is that other players are now scoring goals. We've got other players coming on. Parker's returned, got an assist tonight. I'd never actually watched him before. I thought when he came on, he looked very good for Carlisle. And as I mentioned, got the assist, the pass through to Ajiboy for the third goal. Luke Armstrong, a very capable striker in this division. I thought he, once again tonight, got another goal. Did he? I'm trying to think now. Yeah, I'm sure it was Ajiboy twice. Oh, no, and Embleton, I should say. But Luke Armstrong, as I mentioned, and overall, when I look at him, and he's obviously got into double digits himself now at Carlisle, so he's a proven goal scorer. And, even Ajiboy, who's recently come into form, he's never really been prolific in his career, but he's starting to score now for Carlisle. If Embleton can start chipping in with more goals too, I feel going forward, and even Kelly as well, going forward for me, when I look at Carlisle, I think they've got a lot of options, and I don't think they're as reliant on Regan Linney as some may think, or maybe they were before Christmas time. Charlie White comes back tonight, very injury prone, but we know when he's a fully fit player, he were banging goals in League One, prolifically for Sunderland. So, he's clearly got the capabilities, if they can get him up to full fit, to chip in with goals too. So I think on the forward front, I'm really confident about Carlisle. The concern for me is that defence, and there were too many signs for me tonight of on another day, sides would punish you. I can see why when I look at the York game as well, and I can see why they've struggled against York, Rochdale, Boreham Wood. It's because defensively they're just way too open, and sides can cut them open, and they're making mistakes. And this is why they're slipping up in individual matches. And it often feels like Carlisle are the sort of team where their aim is to kind of outscore teams. And I just feel, for me, like if I were looking now at recruiting players, I think they need to go out and get another centre half at least. Until the end of the season, because I just don't really have much faith in Hayden anymore. And Terrell Thomas, he's club captain, but was the previous captain. He's another player that, for me, I look at him and he's got a mistake in him too. And as I've mentioned, there's just too many players in that back four for Carlisle that make too many mistakes. Even the goalkeeper tonight, I think, is a very good shot stopper, but he's another one that's got a mistake in him too. We saw tonight he made a mistake, and fortunately it didn't lead to a goal, but on another night, as I've mentioned, that could have caused a goal too. And, Scunthorpe, the amount of chances they had, they should have easily at least got a point out of that game. And I think if I was a Scunthorpe fan, I'd be very disappointed that they haven't, because I think over the course of the 90 minutes, they deserved at least a point just purely because of, Carlisle's mistakes. David's coming tonight anyway and said, neither team will go up, both very similar, crap in possession and too many mistakes at the back. I agree on although they've won, I kind of agree on Carlisle in terms of the mistake side of things. I think Scunthorpe, I feel like that was a bit of a one-off when I look at the mistake that they made. I feel usually I've got a lot of confidence in them defensively, to be honest. I think tonight, it was just that one mistake that they made that led to Carlisle. Carlisle getting two of the goals, I should say, tonight. And then we've also had in the playoffs, moments can matter, and with Linney, they'll always have a chance of that if he can rediscover his early season form. Yeah, he's just struggling. He's not getting like opportunities on goals at all. He's getting marked out of games, and the issue for me is that, well, it's not an issue actually. I think the good thing for me is it feels like other players within Carlisle have picked up on it, and they're starting to chip in with the goals now, and they're not as one-dimensional as what potentially they were at earlier points, within the season overall. So, yeah, I think going forward, I have a lot of confidence in Carlisle when I look at that. I think there's still, if your budget's unlimited, if it's to York's extent, which obviously it isn't, it's still a very strong budget. Probably I'd predict the second highest in this league, alongside maybe Forest Green. I would think that Carlisle have the opportunity to go out and sign a number of players, but Mark Hughes has come out previously and mentioned that they missed out on a lot of targets in January, and I know there's no window, but that's usually when a lot of National League sides do their business. But if it is possible, and it was me, I'd be looking at bringing in a centre half, a full back, and probably another winger as well going forward. But no, I think the main areas is definitely that centre-half position for me alongside Feeney. I just think they become a complete different outfit if they could just cut these mistakes out. And I think bringing in another competent centre-half, I feel they'd be a lot more stronger defensively. Scunthorpe, as we've mentioned, missed opportunities tonight. It's let them down. I feel they have to just move on from this one. Carlisle have now done the double over Scunthorpe. That's only Scunthorpe's fourth defeat of the season. I think in both games, I've watched both games. I feel for me when I look at both games, I think they've both been very even, and on different days, Scunthorpe could have got 6 points out of 6. It could have easily flipped on its head, and those are two sides that could easily meet, in the playoffs, and it certainly would be a good game, that, because both games for me have been very even. But no, as for Scunthorpe, I don't think you can get too down. It's the fourth defeat, of course, double over Carlisle. I think they've played, I wouldn't say relatively well tonight. I don't think they were awful. I think they played okay. I don't think they were bad, as I've mentioned, and I think they played pretty well in the reverse fixture too. So that's 2 of your games where you've not been that awful in those 4 defeats. And as for Carlisle, from their perspective, they've got the job done. It doesn't really matter about the performance now. It doesn't matter about the mistakes. Yes, you can look at that for future weeks, but tonight, all that mattered was getting 3 points. They could have beat them 5-0 like York did to them a few weeks ago, or like Rochdale, beat them quite comfortably, although it was 1-0 the other day. It doesn't really matter how you win for me. I just think at this stage of the season, it's just about getting the results. But I do feel, you look at that for future weeks. There's surely Mark Hughes has got to be looking at that and thinking, right, we might need to be going out and bringing in another defender and maybe even another fullback. We're going to take a look at other results tonight. Quickly, before we do wrap things up, of course, it's a reaction to this game. I want to look at some of the other National League fixtures that I haven't watched or watched the highlights of yet. I haven't had time. But we are going to take a look at the actual results. Of course, Altrincham saw off Wealdstone on home soil. That sees Altrincham have a bit of breathing space now on the bottom 4. Of course, they've played more games than anyone around them after tonight. So they really did need to get all 3 points. Just 2 points behind Wealdstone now, but Wealdstone, have got games in hand on them too. Solihull Moors losing on home soil to Eastleigh. Eastleigh's been a side that in recent weeks have spoke about them being dragged into this relegation battle. Another side have played a lot more games and a lot of sides around them, yet they've pulled it out of the bag against a fairly, I would say, informed Solihull Moors side over the balance of things. I know they've had 2 defeats after tonight, but that was against York. And I think prior to that, if we go back, it was against Rochdale too. But I think overall, they've been pretty good of Solihull and really stepped up under Millington. Yet they were defeated tonight by Eastleigh by, 3 goals to 2. Eastleigh coming from 2-0 down as well against Solihull Moors. So, for Eastleigh, they must be full of confidence, I should say, after that. And of course, for themselves, avoided being dragged into this kind of relegation battle for the meantime. They're sitting in 15th place now with a game in hand on Boston, who sit above them. Truro losing on home soil to Woking. quite a bad result for them. Of course, they'd have been looking to build after defeating Morecambe at the weekend. But of course, losing on home soil for them now, 30 games played, 4 points away from safety. You know, if they'd have won tonight, they'd have been 1 point behind Sutton. But yeah, on home soil as well, where it's probably been their strongest position, where they've been strongest this season, is the only kind of saving grace to their season so far, with 5 wins at home. Out of the 6 wins they've actually got, they were quite disappointed losing that one to Woking on home soil. For Woking, sitting 11th, we've mentioned playoffs. It's probably too much for an ask now. 9 points behind Halifax at this moment in time. And as for Boston, another big win for them under Paul Hurst now, defeating Gateshead at home. And, you know, Gateshead not played in a very long time prior to tonight. They've not played since the 20th of January due to postponements and other sides being in the FA Trophy when they're meant to play them. And, that's not a good result for Rob Elliott either. They're getting really cut adrift now towards the bottom. They're 9 points adrift of safety at the moment. So certainly concerning times for Gateshead, and it does feel like it's going to be a long way back for them to be able to survive and maintain their National League status for next season. And then finally, as for Morecambe, dropping points on home soil against Tamworth. Tamworth at home for a new manager. You know, you look at Altrincham, Truro and Tamworth. I think those three, when you look at Morecambe's situation at the moment, I think you've got to be looking at getting at least 7 points out of those games, and to only have picked 2 points out of a possible of 9, for me, is cause for concerns under a new manager at the moment. If they're wanting to survive this season, you know, it's usually about 50 points to survive in the National League. They're currently sitting on 23 and they've got 15 games remaining. So they're going to need to win at least probably about 12 of the remaining 15 to survive if it's the same points tally as what it's been in previous years. So a really disappointing result for them tonight, leading as well. They were twice tonight, taking the lead before Tamworth equalised, and then Morecambe went on to score a late winner. Well, they felt it was going to be a late winner before Tamworth equalised late on. So a really disappointing evening for Morecambe and for Jim Bentley's side. And that kind of wraps up all the fixtures tonight and the kind of reaction. I think that's kind of it for people with the comments tonight. Thank you to everyone that's tuned in to this instant match reaction. Of course, we've got a full bunch of the second half of National League fixtures taking place tomorrow night. I mean, we may well do another reaction to one of the fixtures. It's between 3 games at the moment that I'll be picking. Of course, my side, Halifax, are in action against Brackley. York have got Hartlepool tomorrow, which should be quite a tasty game. Rochdale versus Forest Green is probably the standout game. Rochdale, you know, currently sitting top of the tree at the moment. Forest Green Rovers sitting 5th. You know, they'll be looking to get back to winning ways after losing to York at the weekend. Sutton have got Braintree. That's a huge game towards the bottom of the table as well. Sutton sitting 20th and Braintree sitting 21st. Both level on points too for that one. Bournemouth looking to get back to winning ways against Yeovil tomorrow night. They could actually climb back into the top 3, I believe, on goal difference if they win that. And then Aldershot hosts Southend United. Aldershot, under John Coleman in recent weeks, have had a massive upturn in form. Just 1 defeat in the previous 5 games and 4 wins out of 5 as well for the Shots. Of course, most recently coming from behind, back from 2-0 down against my side, Halifax, at the weekend. I'll be hoping they do us a favour against Southend United tomorrow night. And of course, Halifax are facing Brackley. Halifax looking to maintain their top 7 place, with Southend in action too. Brackley looking to climb further away from the drop zone. Of course, they're 4 points above the bottom 4 at the moment. And that more or less wraps up the podcast. Thanks to everyone that's tuned in, and we will see you tomorrow. Remember to like and subscribe, and bye for now.